Greetings, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. Before I continue with the reading from Transylvania Sunrise by Radu Cinamar, translated, well, not translated, but the translation was, I guess, finalized and then published at the behest of American author Peter Moon, who is probably most famous for his books on the Montauk Project, which I don't know that much about. It's a fascinating subject. I don't know what to make of it. But I was watching an interview on YouTube. It wasn't an interview, it was a lecture by Peter Moon. And he was talking, the subject, oh my goodness, I can't remember exactly how he got onto the topic exactly, but he was talking about somehow the figure of Saint Germain appeared in his research in relation to information he found about plans in, let's say, 1775 to establish a 14th colony. The 14th colony was going to be called the Transylvania Colony in the United States, and interestingly, it was going to be in what we now know to be Kentucky. And I thought that was interesting for several reasons, but one of them was last month, I had this sudden attack of interest. I can't think of another way to describe it, in Kentucky, particularly Louisville, Kentucky, where we just had this confrontation and near conflagration a couple days ago in Louisville. But for some reason, I just, out of nowhere, I've never been there or anything, I just started Googling photographs of Louisville, Kentucky, and no particular reason, I didn't understand it. And then I found this lecture by Peter Moon, which I will track it down and retrace exactly how he got on the subject, but he was Googling things and trying to find connections, and out of nowhere, Saint Germain is not mentioned in the title of his lecture or anything, but he talks about how Saint Germain was implicated, well, not implicated, it was something illegal about it, although King George III did not approve of it finally, because he didn't apparently allow colonists to do direct transactions with the native people. But I was interested in this idea of Saint Germain appearing in the colonies and being a kind of lightning rod or an instigator of the American Revolution, perhaps in a kind of as a spiritual instigator. And then I saw this, it only took up like 30 seconds of the lecture, but he talks about how there's a record of Saint Germain being in the colonies, trying to establish this 14th colony in what we now know to be the central and eastern parts of Kentucky. And so I Googled it, and I found no mention of Saint Germain in Wikipedia. Of course, that doesn't mean that much. I think Wikipedia is fairly reliable, but it did say Transylvania Colony, also referred to as Transylvania Purchase, was a short-lived, I'm kind of a grammar nerd, and I know a lot of people say short-lived, that's what most people say, but it's actually, the correct pronunciation is short-lived, that is, having a short life. Short-lived extra-legal colony founded during 1775 by land speculator Richard Henderson, who controlled the North Carolina-based Transylvania Company. Henderson and his investors had reached an agreement to purchase a vast tract of Cherokee lands, blah, blah, blah. But I went through it. There's no mention of Saint Germain, except that it's quite interesting that the company was founded by apparently the big venture, the company behind it was the Transylvania Company. The Richard Henderson, who was a judge from North Carolina, he organized a land speculation company. It was originally called Richard Henderson and Company, The company name was first changed to the Louisa Company and finally to the Transylvania Company on January 6th, 1775. The Transylvania Company investors hoped to establish a British proprietary colony by purchasing the Kentucky lands from the Cherokee, who had earlier settled much of the south and southeastern Kentucky areas and still claimed hunting rights in the abandoned Shawnee lands. So I thought, well, how can I trust? How do I know? There's no mention of Saint-Germain, except that why would Richard Henderson change the name of the company to Transylvania out of every possible name he could have named it from his own name to Louisa Company? Suddenly it's Transylvania Company with no explanation, which suggests to me that perhaps Saint-Germain was there and played a kind of behind-the-scenes role, because I think we know enough about him by now to not be surprised if he wanted to conceal himself in some way behind what he was doing, because I think he knew enough about the world to know that that was perhaps the best way to be an influencer and to avoid premature death, was to kind of hide behind a curtain or several curtains and to be a bit mysterious. So it could be that he worked behind Richard Henderson and at the behest of Saint-Germain. I'm just speculating. He changed the name of the company to Transylvania Company, and the idea would be, and I can imagine that Saint-Germain, if he took a very almost parental, a spiritually parental identification and role, spiritual role in the shaping of the concepts that we now associate with the best tradition of what we call the American spirit, I think it makes sense that he would have wanted perhaps to attach the name of Transylvania, his homeland, to this colony. So I don't know. I'm going to get more into that. But for now, let's get back to Transylvanian Sunrise. And look over the notes for the last couple of videos and you'll see the full context of this book. And you'll understand the context of the confrontation that I'm going to go into here between the Romanian intelligence officer, Cezar Brad, and Signore Massimo from the Bilderberg / Propaganda 2 P2 Freemason Lodge. And this confrontation, battle of wits, exposes a great deal about the negative side of Freemasonry. And in this section, he goes into the relationship between good and evil. It's almost a kind of symbiotic relationship. That's an oversimplification, maybe. But I thought that too often, I think, certainly for me, the idea of good and evil becomes a very abstract, almost antiquated notion. But I think this very real life situation and explication kind of gives us a more practical or immediate perception or conception of this dynamic between good and evil and how it plays out, how it is being played out in our society today and our world, and how I think we're reaching a point where the good has a chance, a tipping point is at hand. The good I would associate with the best impulses behind the American Revolution, which they attempted to transplant to the French, to France, to inform and inspire the French revolutionary. Well, it wasn't really supposed to be a revolution as we understand the term today. Unfortunately, as we see them trying exactly the same kind of tactics today in the United States, they take the impulse toward freedom and they subvert it, and they take it into a very dark and destructive so-called revolutionary direction. I saw, what's his name, Richard Davis Hansen, an interview with him on YouTube today, and he talks about how we may be facing, interestingly enough, a kind of dueling revolutionary vision, a duel between revolutionary visions between the French Revolution as we know it, replete with the terror and all the violence and the mob mentality and the cruelty and the element of propaganda, and the American revolutionary spirit, which is, we need to have personal sovereignty. We need to make our own decisions. We subscribe to higher values than the values of man. Interestingly, I believe that the impulse behind the French Revolution, as it became this very dark program, initially, at least in the early stages, kicked off by this artificially induced famine, which was engineered by British agents. We see, I think, a reflection of that in the United States with Black Lives Matter, with Antifa, with the deep state. They certainly reflect a little bit too well. It's a little disturbing. What we visited, what we saw. If you go back and watch the videos on the French Revolution, they certainly reflect the dark intervention and subversion by the British, by the imperialists, by international bankers, in what was supposed to be a peaceful transition to the constitutional monarchy, and it became something quite horrific instead. So that's how all of this ties together, and I know I'm going in a bit of a circumlocuitous way in what my ultimate goal would be to be. The question is, who is or who was Saint-Germain? What is his role? And how much of it can we know from verifiable facts, and how much of it might be on perhaps through more metaphysical means of knowing, ways of knowing, which I'm open to. I have difficulty accepting it, but I do recognize that this figure, the spirit of Saint-Germain is very, very active today, very alive. I see a lot of Saint-Germain videos on YouTube. Most of them are in Spanish or in Portuguese, but I recognize that his spirit is still alive, and I think it's fair to say that we can associate it with the spirit of freedom and the spirit of infinite possibilities that we have all within us. And that might be the violet flame aspect. I have to look more into that. So let's get into the next chapter, and I'm going to leave out the first part. I'm going to go right into the conversation between, as told by Radu Cinamar, between Cesar Brad and Signore Massini from the Bilderbergs. I think it's a little unfortunate that this translation is not the best. So this first sentence, I don't quite understand it. Initiatory Explanations, kind of an interesting phrase. Happy to have the opportunity to fill in some gaps in my understanding regarding certain aspects of the first meeting between Cesar and Signore Massini. I asked why the Masons and those that were joining them were most of the time completely aware, or could be maybe supposed to be completely unaware, that they were choosing everything related to it. I have to say, I just don't know what that means. I'd love a chance to clean up this translation. I knew that in these times, humanity has a tendency towards moral, ethical, and spiritual decay, but I was also convinced that the good was able to defeat this dreaming state that was trying to take over, this dream state, or as I was watching Sasha Stone, who is the founder of the International Tribunal of Natural Justice, the ITNJ, and I think you can find them on YouTube, and it's really fascinating stuff. Sasha Stone in interviews often talks about this dream spell that we're under, which is a lot like The Matrix, from the movie The Matrix, the dream spell, the spell that is cast over us, causing us to fall into kind of semi-consciousness or semi-unconsciousness, depending on how you want to look at it. And some people are, according to Sasha Stone and according to others, some people are almost completely, their consciousnesses are completely subsumed by this dream spell that arguably some people have said that this is a spell that is woven throughout society, into society, or actually informs the fabrication of all of the institutions and tendencies and characteristics of our society, that it is composed of what you would call elements that induce a kind of unconscious cooperation in something that goes against our own best interests in the big picture. So I thought it was interesting, just that he says this dreaming state that was trying to take over, and Sasha Stone talks about the dream spell. Very serious. Cesar then explained that the fundamental elements in anyone's destiny is free will. Again, I think we can see the deep state, the exponents of the new French Revolution are wanting to remove or negate this essential primary, I don't call it a phenomenon, but it's the basis. It's irreducible. It's irrefutable. It is the basis of life itself, which is free will. But certainly they're waging an attack on it. And I saw a video of riots in, I think it was Portland, and as I watched, I said, God, if I just slowed down this video, it was like vandals and protesters, pushing on barriers and smashing windows and throwing things. And if I just slowed down this video 25%, it would just look like one of those zombie movies. I mean, my God, these people just seemed absolutely on the verge of in a kind of dream state. They were not thinking, independent, critical beings exercising free will. They were under some kind of spell, and it was quite shocking to me how much they resembled the zombies from the movies. So let's go on. Cesar then explaining. Structured as it is, the human being contains good as well as evil. That's why we can say that a human's superior nature coexists with his inferior nature. Important it is which one of those aspects is awakened and amplified inside us. You will probably ask me now, what good or evil represents? I don't want to lose ourselves in philosophical commentaries and observations, but I will tell you basically that the good can be understood as the absence of evil. Obviously, following the same logic, the evil is the absence of good. I believe it isn't news for you that Christianity associates these two aspects with heaven and hell, but beyond the subtle planes of manifestation to which heaven and hell, or generally speaking good and evil, are linked to, these two opposites can be found much nuanced in the everyday life of any human being. That's why some people, in their misery, and not by accident, get to call their lives a living hell, while others, being happy, relate to their lives as paradise. If one chooses to do evil, one will no doubt go towards hell, and then, in a certain way, inferno manifests itself through one. The radiance and influence of a person like that will then be evil, and that will keep him away from good and happiness. the ones that choose evil don't really understand that the meaning of their life is to improve themselves. So they fiercely fight against good, harmony, love, and beauty. It is good to know, however, that the human being is completely free to choose between the two extremes, good and evil. No one is forced or obliged. It's purely one's choice. Here, of course, personal destiny and certain very profound subconscious tendencies have a great influence. But even when the force and determination of these impulses seems to be invincible, there is still a certain percent left for free will. This never completely disappears. If it would happen so, the human being would just be a puppet in the hands of some obscure exterior forces. This is why, even in the most dramatic situations, humans are free to choose. They then have the opportunity to choose good and get an unhoped-for chance. From here, step by step, they can redo their lives, starting from a totally different premise. Okay, I'll just go on. I won't stop and comment. There's a lot going on in my mind relative, looking at, reflecting on what some people might call the New World Order agenda, which seems to want people to actually become, reduce people to puppets, or, as Aldous Huxley talked about, people will learn to love their servitude. They will embrace the role of puppets. They will relish it, in fact, which is what I think you're seeing. There's a kind of intoxication in the United States and elsewhere, not just in the United States. This French revolutionary agenda is being played out in other countries as well around the world. I think Bolivia, Argentina, where else? I just heard about this today. So it makes sense that they have to try to implement it everywhere globally, because the central bank system is also under under threat by people suddenly waking up out of the dream spell and saying, hey, let's have a real economy, let's have sound money, let's have real development, and waking up to the ugly realities behind central banking, which is a global scourge. So, also, as true as that is, any choice of good involves sacrifice. Have you ever heard of anyone sacrificing himself to do evil? Evil is always easy to be done and is based on inertia, slowness, and ignorance, because it doesn't imply any effort. That is why it is said that it is very easy to do harm, but it is very difficult to do good. The main idea that I want you to understand is that when a human being sacrifices his ineptitude and acts in a harmonious way, he tends toward another state and lifestyle. He evolves because he sacrifices himself, meaning that he gives up what is inferior to gain access to what is superior. Still, many people don't have that inner force that is needed in order to give up on their harmful habits, and that's why at a global level there is an increasing tendency of regress with amplified evil and perversity. And in the previous video, Signore Massini talks about actually how vices and harmful habits are encouraged by the dark side of Freemasonry, because it does deplete and diminish and enslave the individual. Makes them less potent, less creative, less thoughtful. This means, I interjected, and this is the writer interjecting here, this means that the Masonic elite use exactly this inertia, laziness, and mental obscurity that characterizes most people in order to control the world population. It is, then Cesar Brad again. It is perfectly true. The Masons easily manipulate this energy manifested in most human beings on very low vibratory levels through lack of reaction, I guess not responding to threats or perhaps not responding critically to exterior manipulation. Lack of reaction, slowness, inertia, and obscurity. In these situations, the Masons practically generate an almost real state of collective sleepiness that serves its interests in the best way. It is very important for you to correctly understand this aspect of the way the Masons act. Mostly, these actions excuse me. Mostly these actions, which in certain very high Masonic circles involve black magic rituals, are taken from a distance, and those who are receptive to these kinds of energies that tend to be oppressive, to chain you, are easily becoming victims, falling into a strange sleep. I'm not only referring here to the physical phenomenon of sleep, but also to a certain state that people are taken over by where they become very submissive and act as puppets do. These are the ideal terms on which they can be controlled and led without providing or without resisting. This is one of the main Masonic purposes, striving to make it occur at the entire planetary level. From another perspective, you must be aware that this sleep that human beings go through is a manner of protection for the evil forces which use it in order to defend themselves from revealing certain spiritual truths. If you carefully observe the way people react when they are confronted with very elevated spiritual and valuable aspects about their life and evolution, you will surprisingly notice that most of them experience a strange sleepiness. Obviously, this kind of inertial state excludes any superior understanding, constructive attitude, or reaction. And then Radu Cinamar speaks and asks a question or interjects here. As you've stated until now, I said, I see that the Masonic organization owns all the meaningful action in a society, and they'll use it to divide and efficiently control nations. I would say that they vehemently attack anything that is spiritual, authentic, or sublime, thus pursuing the transformation of humanity into some sort of living mechanism, a biological machine that they can operate and rule according to their own will. And indeed, this does go back a long way. If you go back to the Venetian Republic, where a lot of the modern origins for this view of human beings as kind of like biological machines or just humanoid cattle comes from Venetian philosophy. We are not made in the image of God. We do not have free will. We are not spiritual. We are not eternal. We are not transcendent. We are simply biological machines, and anything else is metaphysical nonsense. This view that is pushed and pushed and pushed, and continues to be pushed in the universities. Then he goes on, I was depressed. A helpless rage was devastating my being, and I couldn't find the antidote for it. Perceiving my inner state, Cesar spoke with great kindness. You're right in what you said. Unfortunately, people become like robots, listening only to the orders that are given and obeying them precisely. You must realize that the power of good is immense, and that any action in this respect can prove to be extremely efficient. There's always hope. You only have to know how to feed it with great faith and purity. This will sharpen your attention, and it will help you to act in the adequate way. Be aware that even the Masons have their own weaknesses. And looking at that, I was just thinking of yesterday. I felt the same way about this COVID-19 nonsense and how people are falling in line behind these very unscientific claims, and they're sort of like applauding their own destruction and congratulating themselves on being completely uncritical about the claims that are made regarding the best way to handle this so-called pandemic, And they are not interested in having a discussion. They're not interested in actually evaluating the full range of science that is out there. They're applauding themselves for falling in line behind people they consider the authorities, which I find extremely bizarre, especially for people who generally like to think of themselves as liberal. These people certainly have no resemblance. They bear no resemblance to the sort of liberals I knew growing up, and I grew up on, with the far left. And we were always told, you don't trust the experts, don't trust corporate media, don't trust politicians, don't trust them. Be critical, question. And freedom of speech was largely about, without freedom of speech, how are we supposed to ascertain the truth? If you shut out opinions you don't like, how are you supposed to deal with a crisis? My God. But we live in very, very strange times, and I think it does support the idea that people are under a sort of dream spell, because it's sort of like they're congratulating themselves on, eliminating their own critical faculties, and then using any form of nastiness, censorship, intimidation, subtle or overt violence to shut down opinions that they couldn't even repeat. They're not even acquainted with them. All they know is that, they're hearing things that contradict what their beloved experts are telling them. And I just find this is absolutely bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. But yeah, he's giving an upbeat kind of encouragement. Be aware that even the Masons have their own weaknesses. Yes. I was just about to ask you, I replied. In the past months, I tried to document this subject, and I surprisingly noticed that there are disagreements between the Masonic lodges throughout the world. If this is true, this means that they themselves are divided and powerless. Cesar smiled sympathetically and made it clear for me. One of the greatest farces of the Masonic elite is leaving the impression that two or more Masonic lodges are fighting against each other. The reality is that on the top of their pyramidal structure, the great Masonic masters are getting together very well. At the base of the structure, however, they appear to be enemies. The idea is to create confusion and to mislead, because it is well known that these tactics can fool the common people's vigilance. In fact, it is just an evil force. The one who falls for it because he wasn't warned will not choose one of the lodges thinking it is not the right one. Instead, he will choose the other one, the one he believes is the good one. It is like that only in appearances, because in reality the Masons are and keep on being the same, no matter the tricks they use to fool the common human beings. You have to have faith and to persevere in your beneficial actions. Eventually, even the evil forces are subordinated by the good ones. It is a great universal mystery, the way evil forces play their occult role in respect to evolution. Specifically, the way in which evil comes into place in creation's economy. Not sure I understand that. If anyone has insights, please write me a note. Specifically, the way in which evil comes into place in creation's economy. I was amazed and silent. Like most people, I knew that white is white and black is black. Now I was being told that, in fact, there is a meaning and a correlation even between these extremes. What do you mean? That even evil has a purpose in our life? I asked. A very important one. To correctly understand this aspect, you have to have an open and I think unprejudiced free mind. Fanaticism, especially the religious or ideological type, doesn't go along with spiritual evolution. I silently agreed. I was all eyes and ears, prepared to listen to all the valuable information that Cesar was offering. The fact that we have both good and evil in the universe, as you can see for yourself, is an eloquent enough proof that attests to the existence of freedom of choice, a way to individually exercise free will. In other words, acting out of ignorance, the human being chooses to self-destruct, denying himself in this way. This is why, with a more thorough analysis, choosing evil means choosing to fight against yourself, which, in the end, leads to self-destruction. This deepens the mysterious way good and evil relate because it involves the fact that evil forces have a hidden purpose in the universe as well as in the life of every human being. I don't know to what extent you're familiar with the ideas about the meaning of existence and spiritual progress, but I will let you know that human evolution primarily means the return to the primordial, purely spiritual source from where one came. Imagine for now that this origin is itself the eternal reality of a sublime happiness that every human being wishes for. This return of the being to spiritual origins must be fully conscious and free of any inferior temptation, of anything that could mean illusion, constraint, and prejudice. If you correctly understand this aspect, you can say you understand why evil is needed in creation. I was a little confused because I was not getting to the essence of the problem yet. Cesar continued to explain very patiently. If evil didn't exist, you couldn't realize the necessity of your return to the source, and you would endlessly wander through who knows what corners of the universe. This way, though, evil's role in the creation of the universe has the main purpose of testing human beings. This is how the level of knowledge, spiritual evolution, and capacity to love of every individual is tested. In connection with the choices one makes, it can be determined if one passed that life test or not. Similar to the exams in universities, I observed. Exactly. The same as those or the ones in the professional field. The only difference is that while these first ones are illusory and ephemeral, being part of a limited space-time domain, life's tests or exams have spiritual meanings and represent steps of great importance in our personal evolution. Successfully passing one of these kinds of tests can mean an important victory in the struggle of dominating the inferior nature of human beings. And this victory can materialize in an increased capacity of understanding certain subtle aspects of life, resulting in a gradual awakening of spiritual maturity and discernment, or in a multitude of other beneficial and positive aspects. Cesar took a short break to leave me some time for thinking and reflecting. I wanted to make sure I understood. What is precisely tested and how can we recognize these tests, I asked, paying great attention to the new direction this conversation was taking. Most of life's exams test your faith and judgment, but often, because of their ignorance, people take these tests as great misfortunes. as a terrible thing or or harm done to them that makes them stagger on their feet. In these cases, the evil manifests itself mainly for the testing and purification of human beings. I see this is Cesar Brad responding. In these cases, evil manifests itself mainly for the testing and purification of the human beings. During their evolution, no one can escape from life's different kind of tests, lessons, and exams. Practically speaking, these tests are our own confrontation with the forces of evil that are part of creation's demonic and satanically subtle plans. This is valid for individuals as well as for a couple, a community, or even a nation. But, I said, we are often helped by others when we face difficult times or when we ask for their advice in a very complicated life problem. Who is then passing the test, us or the ones who help us? You must be aware that to help doesn't mean to force. Someone can be advised and guided in the right direction, but that someone still has his own free will. Nevertheless, exercising your free will and having the possibility to choose implies that the human being is aware and responsible for their freedom. A human being can be helped, supported, prodded, but beyond all this lies the freedom of choice between the options available. If that person would be forced to follow a certain path, even if profoundly beneficial, then her freedom is actually canceled. This is why it is very important for the human being to be given the right to choose. But that choice will be influenced by the degree of consciousness and discernment that is possessed by that being. You now know enough about the Masons' involvement at a global level, and you are aware of the terrible battle between good and evil on this planet. In spite of all this, you are free at any moment to choose on whose side you want to be. On whose side you want to be. If, thanks to your inner structure and, as is obvious already, you choose good, then you will continue to act in this direction and you will persevere in your fight against the Masonic plans. The same applies to all other people, only most of them don't even know the truth about what the Masonic plan is in reality. More than that, the way evil forces act, more than that, the way evil forces us to act maybe is so perverted that it infiltrates anywhere it finds a fertile place, anywhere a weak or contaminated enough conscience appears. Such a weakness and contamination manifests when someone comes out loudly with the theory that we are surrounded only by attacks, conspiracies, manipulation, and backstage plays, when, in fact, none of these exist. And everything is fine and going according to the natural laws. The reality is that behavior like that is typical for a person who is tortured by multiple demonic influences which force them to play by their rules. If that specific person belongs to an intellectual elite, or if he is a scientist, writer, or columnist, then all the better for the Masonic plans. The unfortunate opinion of a person of this kind that can be said to have a certain intellectual authority can greatly influence the conceptions of all those other people. Now that's a very interesting passage, and what I think it might mean is that one can uncover these plots and subterfuges and expose them and see them and be alarmed by them. As yesterday I was just like, yesterday I was just ranting about it. But in the end, if you move to a new perspective, a higher vantage point, and you're able to see kind of a cosmic play going on, and you see that these forces only have power if you buy into them and reinforce them and insist that they are real, that they can continue to take hold. Perhaps the solution is, of course, you recognize you can't. It's irresponsible not to see who is doing what to whom. But in the end, to transcend, suddenly I'm reminded of, the Mozart opera, The Magic Flute, where near the end he's with with Pamina, they're walking, before their marriage, I think, they're walking through hell, and he's playing the flute, and the idea is they have to get through this hell, this inferno, this horror, these horrible realities, and walk through it, and maintain peace of mind, maintain a transcendent perspective on all of this. And I think maybe that's what Cesar is getting at, and giving us kind of the answer we need to cope with it in the moment, and also to transcend it, and to transform and to transition the world into the good, toward the good. Let's see, going on. You probably know, however, that one of Satan's greatest farces is to convince human beings that there is no devil, that Satan himself doesn't exist. This is about the same way that Masonic organizations function, leaving the impression that they do and wish only good. Everything is, in the end, just a mask, because in reality, they are more or less out in the open as being against good religion, faith, and spirituality. Let me go back. This is about the same way that Masonic organizations function, leaving the impression that they do and wish only good. Everything is, in the end, just a mask, because in reality, they are more or less out in the open as being against good religion, faith, and spirituality. Okay. If anyone understands that, please let me know. Then Radu speaks up here. I don't understand how it is possible for human beings to live in this huge conspiracy and not even be aware of its existence, I exclaimed. Why are you surprised? Even you, not until long ago, used to live without even knowing about the Masons and their terrible plans. It's funny, in the United States, we're really brainwashed into believing that this doesn't exist. That it's, if you talk about Freemasons, then you're obviously wearing the proverbial tinfoil hat, and everyone assumes it's all been debunked, and you don't even want to bring it up because you don't want to seem like a fool. But in other countries, Romania included, I was watching a Romanian show on, my Romanian's very bad, but I could kind of, I'm at the point where I can kind of understand what they're saying. There was several TV shows that I've seen from on YouTube from Romanian television talking about the influence of Freemasons on Romania, but also on the world, and in particularly the New World Order. So we shouldn't be so smug about dismissing all of this. I think it's really dangerous, and it shows Americans to be foolish in the long run. Many world leaders have been very outspoken and have acknowledged this right up front, and have actually talked directly to their people about it. I don't know if the Romanian government has done that, but certainly you see these television shows by well-regarded Romanian journalists, real journalists, investigative journalists. We don't have those in the United States anymore. Well, we have them, but they don't work for mainstream. They don't work for the mainstream. Okay. Even you, until not long ago, used to live without even knowing about the Masons and their terrible plans. You probably saw that a lot of things are not right, but you probably didn't approach the matter in a more mature way. Now you know the truth, and your nature, that is very good, makes you want to stand up and share this information with others. You already have the extraordinary chance to do it, publishing what I have thus far told you. the first step to be taken is to get the public's attention over the surrounding reality. It is like when you toll the bells on a Sunday in a city that is asleep. People will start to gradually wake up and then ask for more details. But even more important than that is them paying increased attention to what is happening around them and even around the world, because they then already have strong resources of information. Their vigilance is a first and very hard blow for the Masons, because a vigilant being is much more difficult to deceive, manipulate, or control. Afterwards, an entire current of the same opinion will form. In this way, most of the Masons' plans and initiatives will be destroyed even before they start. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Right about now, my God, we've got to get through November. We've got to get through this year, and you know, I'm concerned about the year ahead. And I know I'm not alone, but I don't want to give off fretful vibes. Cesar stopped and looked at me keenly to see if I understood. People's reactions seem to be very weak, I said. And I even wonder how much we're going to accomplish, how we are going to accomplish what we planned. Most prophecies say that in the end, the good forces will prevail. On the other side, the fight is extremely difficult. The Masons, as a horrible hydra, are the ones that conduct all these demonic orientations that bear on all people on this planet. In Romania, for example, especially lately, the Masons act as they please. The poor people are kept ignorant and manipulated. They do not even suspect the reason for the tragedy that they're living. If this hydra were defeated, then we could witness a very rapid regeneration of the entire planet. Unfortunately, the huge majority of people from the West are not paying any attention to the Masons' ways of manipulation, some of it really obvious. Listless and selfish, most of them rather isolate themselves in strange urban hibernation, mistakenly thinking that they rule their own lives. Even if they find out about the Masons' devilish actions, they choose to deny it or rely on others taking measures in their place. More than that, they ignorantly participate in certain demonic orientations that are continuously fed and supported by the Masons through unleashed rock music, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and through a materialistic outlook. In these conditions of gradual but certain degradation of the human being, who in this way loses their own will and determination, it is easy enough for the Masons to fulfill their plans. Cesar suddenly went quiet. It was quite a long break in which both of us remained with our hidden inner thoughts. Eventually he started speaking again, but I could feel a slight tinge of sadness in his voice. Unfortunately, the situation is the same in our country. People are sleeping. They're not awake, lucid. Even though some fundamental elements about the Masons and their world plans have been published, people's dramatic sleepiness and inertia, I don't think he means dramatic, I think he means marked. Sleepiness and inertia, which is already correlated with the sleep of reason, has been so much amplified that there are very few who at least believe what is said about the Masons to be true. This, in fact, is the terrible reality. Everything seems so awful and unbelievable to them that, acting under a subconscious impulse of fear and self-preservation, they would rather believe that maybe the situation is not as bad as it seems. Maybe this kind of information only denigrates actions of some staggering forces mastered by who knows what reasons. Therefore, they rather lock themselves in their own shell and continue to remain in the state of ineptitude that embraces them. This state is even worse when than when they hadn't any clue about the Masons' demonic plans, because to know and still not to react is a great cowardice and a big deviation from the most elementary moral code. In a situation like that, it is not the one who doesn't know, but the one who knows but doesn't act accordingly who is the fool. This is why the first and most important stage is the awakening of the people's conscience from this awful sleepiness. If they don't become lucid, they will never understand why their life standards are so low, or why so many unusual things take place every day. This also happens because in most times the essence of the Masons' actions is well hidden in occult symbols. This was one of the weak points I wanted to clarify with Cesar, because I've already made some connections of my own, but I still needed some further explanations. I took advantage of this opportunity and asked, do they use certain symbols in their rituals in order to influence the results of their demonic plans? There are indeed some Masonic symbols that are very well known, such as the compass and trowel. Others, however, much more occult. That is, occult means hidden, right? For example, the pyramid with its all-seeing eye at its top is not accidentally on the $1 bill. Of course, now everybody knows that. This is like cliche, the pyramid, the all-seeing eye. Once it came out, I mean, this was written in 2003, so I would say certainly in the last 5 years, we've seen an explosion of this image, pumped out everywhere and embraced by pop culture and satirized everywhere. So, but that's what you do when you want to keep something hidden, is to just, make it come out in a big way, and then everyone thinks, oh my God, this is too extreme. It can't be real. It's some kind of fashion statement. It's just a current trend, and that's how you can hide things in plain sight. But let's see. Let's stop there. I thought I don't want to go on too long. I fear that I already have, and now we're almost at the 1 hour mark. I think I'll continue on next time and finish this up, and then get back into. We'll go back and we'll address Saint-Germain. We will get back into reports of Saint-Germain, accounts of his exploits, and dig more deeply into his factual, as much as we can ascertain the facts, his factual origins. So I hope everyone is doing great, and let's talk soon.